The collector's discovery. The first thing Thaddeus noticed wasn't the blood seeping through her torn coat, or the way she pressed herself against the brick wall like a cornered animal. It was the point shoe clutched in her left hand. Its pink, satin darkened with rain and grime, ribbons frayed but still wound around her wrist like a prayer. He'd been closing up the shop, locking away another day's worth of broken treasures that most people would consider worthless. The storm had been building all afternoon, and he'd hurried through the alley toward the side entrance when he saw her there in the wedge of shadow between two dumpsters, knees drawn up, shivering. "Miss?" His voice came out softer than intended. She flinched violently, her head snapping up to reveal a face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and startling against skin that had once been luminous, but now bore the gray pallor of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. "Please," she whispered, and the word cracked like old porcelain. "I'll move, I'm sorry, I'll go." But Thaddeus was already crouching down, his long coat spreading around him like dark wings. Up close he could see the careful way she held her right leg, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of pain long endured. Her hair, once probably golden, hung in damp tangles around her shoulders. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She stared at him, as if the question were in a foreign language. What?" "Food. When did you last have a proper meal?" Her lips parted, then closed. She looked down at the point shoe in her hands, thumb tracing its worn edge. "Tuesday, I think, or maybe Monday. The days." She shook her head. They blur, together. It was Friday. Thaddeus had spent 30 years collecting broken things, learning to see past their damage to the beauty underneath. He recognized the signs. The careful way she held herself upright despite obvious pain, the stubborn tilt of her chin even as she apologized for existing, the death grip on that single remnant of whatever life she'd lost. She was like the Ming, face currently sitting on his workbench, cracked down one side but still holding its essential grace. "I have soup," he said simply. "And it's warm inside." Her eyes widened with something that might have been hope, quickly tamped down by wariness. I can't pay you, I don't have anything. I'm not selling anything." She studied his face for a long moment, and he let her. Thaddeus Blackwood was not a handsome man in the conventional sense, too angular and sharp-featured with prematurely gray hair and clothes that belonged to another era, but his eyes were kind, and perhaps she saw that. "Why?" she asked finally. He could have said because it was the decent thing to do, because no one should be alone in a storm, because helping was what good people did. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because you remind me of something I once found. A music box, antique, probably worth nothing to most collectors. It was water damaged, the melody warped, the ballerina's tutu cracked and stained. The previous owner was going to throw it away." He paused, rain beginning to fall harder around them. "It took me 3 months to restore it properly. Now it plays Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major perfectly, and the ballerina spins like she's made of starlight." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but a loosening of the rigid fear that had held her spine straight. "I used to dance," she said quietly. "I thought so." She looked down at the shoe again, then back at him. "If I come with you, what do you want? From me?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications and the weight of whatever experiences had taught her to ask it. Thaddeus felt something cold and angry unfurl in his chest at the necessity of such wariness. "Nothing," he said. "A bowl of soup costs nothing, warmth costs nothing, rest costs nothing. Everything costs something. Not in my house." The rain was falling in earnest now, drumming against the alley's pavement and turning the world gray and cold. She was soaked through, he realized, had probably been sitting in this narrow space for hours as the storm built overhead. "What's your name?" he asked. "Celeste." The word came out like a secret she hadn't meant to share. "Celeste." He repeated it carefully, giving it the weight it deserved. "I'm Thaddeus. Will you let me help you stand?" She hesitated, then nodded. He offered his hand, and after a moment's pause, she took it. Her fingers were ice-cold and trembling, but her grip was surprisingly strong. The movement of rising revealed the full extent of her injury. Her right leg couldn't bear her full weight, and she had to lean heavily against the wall to keep from falling. "It's not far," he said gently. "Just around the corner." She took a tentative step, winced, then another. He wanted to offer his arm for support, but sensed that too much help too quickly would spook her. Instead, he walked slowly beside her, ready to catch her if she fell. The Blackwood Mansion sat at the end of Elm Street like a sleeping giant, all Gothic towers and ivy-covered walls. Most people found it imposing, even sinister. But Thaddeus had always thought it looked lonely, more than anything else. Tonight, with warm light spilling from its windows onto the rain-dark street, it looked like refuge. Celeste stopped at the front gate, staring up at the house with wide eyes. "You live here? Alone?" "Yes." "It's enormous." "Yes," he said again, though he heard the wonder in her voice and it pleased him somehow. "Too big for one person, really, but it has good bones. And I've filled it with things that needed homes." He unlocked the heavy front door and held it open for her. She stepped inside cautiously like someone entering a cathedral, and Thaddeus saw his home through her eyes. The grand staircase with its carved banister, the Persian rugs worn soft. With age, the walls lined with paintings and mirrors and curiosities gathered from decades of collecting. But it was warm, blessedly warm, and he heard her sharp intake of breath as the heat embraced her. "The kitchen's this way," he said, leading her down a hallway lined with portraits of people whose names he'd never learned. She followed slowly, still clutching that point shoe, her head turning to take in the organized chaos of his life's work. The kitchen was the most normal room in the house, all white tile and copper pots and the lingering smell of the bread he'd baked that morning. He settled her at the small table by the window and moved to the stove, ladling vegetable soup into a bowl, cutting thick slices of brown bread, pouring milk into a glass. When he set the food in front of her, she stared at it as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Go ahead," he said gently. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a tentative sip, then another. Then she began to eat in earnest, trying to maintain dignity even as hunger overwhelmed her. He busied himself with cleaning dishes that didn't need cleaning, giving her privacy in her desperation. Only when she'd finished everything in the bowl did she look up at him. There were tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome. I should go. I've imposed enough." "Celeste." He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the scarred wooden table. "It's nearly midnight and the storm isn't stopping. You can barely walk and you haven't eaten in days. Where exactly are you planning to go?" She looked away toward the rain-lashed window. "I don't know." "Then stay here tonight. There's a guest room upstairs, clean sheets, a bathroom with hot water. In the morning, if you want to leave, I'll help you figure out where to go next." "Why are you doing this?" He considered the question, looking at her across the table. Even exhausted and half-starved, even with her hair tangled and her clothes torn, she was beautiful. But it wasn't her beauty that moved him. It was the way she held herself, like something precious that had been broken and was trying to remember its worth. "Because," he said finally, "everyone deserves to be seen as more than their damage." She stared at him for a long moment, then down at the point shoe still clutched in her hand. Slowly, carefully, she set it on the table between them. "Okay," she said. "Just for tonight." But Thaddeus had been collecting broken things long enough to recognize when something was meant to stay. As he led her upstairs to the blue guest room with its four-poster bed and walls lined with restored paintings, he found himself hoping that morning would be a long time coming. The dance of healing. 3 weeks had passed since the storm, and Celeste had not left. She told herself it was temporary, that she was simply gathering strength before moving on. But each morning brought small reasons to stay another day. The way Thaddeus hummed while making coffee, the satisfaction of watching a tarnished silver frame slowly reveal its hidden luster under her careful polishing, The guest room that no longer felt like a guest room but something dangerously close to home. She'd begun helping with his restoration work almost by accident. The second morning, she'd found him in his workshop hunched over a fractured porcelain figurine, squinting through a magnifying glass as he tried to align the smallest fragments. Her hands, trained by years of precise movement and muscle memory, had reached out before her mind could stop them. "May I?" she'd asked, and something in her voice must have convinced him to step aside. Dancers' fingers were different from other people's fingers. They knew how to be strong and gentle simultaneously, how to apply exactly the right pressure, how to feel the natural lines of movement even in stillness. Within minutes, she'd fitted together pieces that had stymied him for days. "How did you?" He'd started to ask, then stopped, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Everything has a natural way it wants to move," she'd said, not looking up from the delicate work. "In ballet, we learn to feel it, the line of the body, the flow from one position to the next. Broken things remember their wholeness, even when they can't show it anymore." That had been the beginning. Now she spent her days in the workshop surrounded by damaged treasures waiting for resurrection. Thaddeus would bring her coffee in a chipped blue mug that somehow never got restored, and they would work in comfortable silence broken only by the occasional murmur of consultation or the soft sound of her laughter when he told stories about particularly stubborn antiques. She was learning his history through the objects he chose to save, the music boxes with their broken melodies, the photographs in cracked frames showing families whose names were lost to time, the children's toys, carefully mended and placed on shelves where they would never be played with again. "You collect orphans," she said one afternoon, holding up a wooden rocking horse with a missing eye and a faded mane. Thaddeus looked up from the clock he was repairing, his hands stilling on the delicate gears. "I suppose I do." "Why?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice careful and low, he said, "I had a family once, a wife, Catherine, a daughter, Lily. She was 5, with curls like spring sunshine and a laugh that could fill a room." Celeste's hands tightened on the rocking horse. She'd wondered about the children's things, the woman's jewelry that appeared sometimes in his collection, always restored with extra care. "There was an accident," he continued, his fingers resuming their work though she could see the slight tremor in them now. "Black ice on the interstate. I was supposed to be with them, but I'd stayed late at an estate sale, distracted by a particularly rare piece." His laugh was bitter, broken. "A Ming vase, cracked but still beautiful. I thought it was more important than a trip to see Catherine's mother." The workshop fell silent except for the tick of various clocks, all keeping slightly different time. After the funeral, I couldn't stand to be around whole things, perfect things. They felt like accusations. He set down his tools and looked at her directly. But broken things, they understood. They didn't judge. They just waited patiently to be seen clearly again. Celeste felt something crack open in her chest, a place she'd kept carefully sealed since the accident that ended her career, since the surgery that saved her leg but stole her dreams, since the months of sleeping in doorways and eating from dumpsters because pride had kept her from calling the few people who might have helped. "I was principal dancer at the Metropolitan Ballet," she said quietly, "for 3 years. It was everything I'd worked for since I was 7 years old." Thaddeus nodded, not pushing, just listening. "Opening night of Giselle, 2 seasons ago, I was flying through the mad scene, completely lost in the music, and then..." She touched her right leg unconsciously. "A torn ligament, shattered kneecap, nerve damage. They said I was lucky to keep the leg at all. But lucky wasn't enough. No." The word came out like a sob she'd been holding back for months. "Lucky doesn't get you back on stage. Lucky doesn't pay for physical therapy when the insurance runs out. Lucky doesn't keep your friends from disappearing when you're no longer useful to their careers." Thaddeus stood slowly and crossed to where she sat. He knelt beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Celeste," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like something precious. "Look at me." She met his gaze, those kind gray eyes that had seen her at her worst and somehow found her worth protecting. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are not less than what you were. You are not a burden or a charity case or something to be pitied." "Then what am I?" The question came, out raw, desperate. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and touched her face with infinite gentleness. "You are someone who has been through fire and came out refined. You are an artist whose medium changed but whose gift remained. You are the person who can see the natural lines of healing in things that others would throw away." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "You are," he said, voice dropping to a whisper, "the most beautiful thing in my collection, Thaddeus. And before you tell me you're not part of my collection," he continued, thumb brushing away her tears, "you should know that I stopped collecting the day you decided to stay. Because suddenly, I had something more precious than all the broken treasures in the world. I had someone who chose to be here." She kissed him then, leaning forward to press her lips to his, with all the grateful desperation of someone who had been starving for kindness and found a feast. He responded, carefully, gently, like she was made of the finest porcelain and might shatter if handled roughly. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I can't dance anymore," she whispered. "No," he agreed, "but you can restore, you can heal, you can take broken things and help them remember their beauty. Is that enough?" "Celeste," he cupped her face in both hands now, holding her gaze. "You took a man who had been dead inside for 5 years and helped him remember what it felt like to wake up grateful. If that's not magic, I don't know what is." That night she moved her few belongings from the guest room to his, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen where she wanted to be. They made love like people who understood fragility with reverence and patience and the knowledge that beautiful things required careful handling. Afterward, she lay in his arms feeling whole for the first time since the accident. Not because he had fixed her, but because he had shown her she had never truly been broken. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "My beautiful, irreplaceable, perfectly imperfect treasure." Outside, the wind rattled the windows of the old house, but inside they were warm and safe and surrounded by a lifetime's worth of rescued things. In the morning, there would be more work to do, more damaged pieces waiting for their patient hands and artist's eyes. But tonight, in the sanctuary, they had built together from loneliness and loss and the radical act of seeing beauty in brokenness. They held each other close and dreamed of silver frames polished bright, of music boxes playing perfect melodies, of point shoes dancing again in different ways. Tomorrow, perhaps, someone else would find their way to the alley behind Blackwood antiques, drawn by desperation and the hope that broken things might still have value. And if they did, they would find not just shelter, but two people who understood that love was not about being perfect. Love was about being seen clearly, cracks and all, and being deemed worthy of restoration.